I've made a tier list of all the teams in Valorant Franchising to try and predict where they'll finish in Brazil. From the potential champions to the biggest underdogs, I'll go through them all. Not all the new rosters have been announced yet, so I'll be working from the latest edition of Flynn's spreadsheet. Go follow him on Twitter if you haven't already. Just remember, this is my opinion and will almost certainly turn out to be completely wrong. That being said, I'm Commend, and this is my Valorant Franchising tier list. Subscribe if you enjoy, and let's do this. I feel bad putting any teams in D tier, but somebody has to be at the bottom of the list. You might be expecting it to be RRQ after my video on them, but it's actually FUT Esports from Turkey. They did just win the VRL in Europe, beating the best tier 2 EMEA teams out there, but with no roster moves coming into 2023, they basically have a tier 2 team in a system designed for tier 1 competition. I actually think they could become a fairly competitive team with time, but I don't see them going far in Sao Paulo. The only other team in the D tier is RRQ, but at least they're not in their own tier anymore, which they would have been a week ago. They were in a similar position to FUT, keeping their tier 2 roster, but after signing Flipstudio and Elmimore from Boom and Onyx, they might not get completely folded in Brazil, and I'd love to see them take some names there. Also, Elmimore is cracked, so keep an eye out for him. At the bottom of C tier is the other Filipino franchising team, Team Secret. I mentioned that FUT practically have a tier 2 team and a tier 1 system, and Team Secret are in a similar spot. They've kept their previous roster with only one change, now playing with Lenny from Bleed. This is a good change, but again not really enough to push them into a higher spot. The only reason they're not in D tier for me is because we have seen them put up some decent performances online in 2021, so the potential is there, but that was a while ago. Carmine Corp's big story this offseason was signing Scream and Nivera from Team Liquid. They're great players, obviously, but the reason I put them in C tier isn't anything to do with Scream or Nivera, it's the fact that they've kept some tier 2 players to fill out their roster. The lack of a clear IGL is also worrying, as that's the exact thing that plagued Liquid for so long when Scream and Nivera were there. Maybe the support of the French fans can carry them through, but I can see the lack of a team structure costing them in Brazil. MIBR have signed the core of Vivo Kid for 2023, with Muris, RGLM and Heat. Vivo Kid weren't able to do much this year, but have been a solid top team in Brazil for a while, with Heat as their superstar player. I'm excited to see if MIBR can translate the raw skill from the VK guys into a great team, although I don't think they'll be able to do it in time for Sao Paulo. The second Turkish team in the EMEA League is BBL, another team who have kept their roster mostly the same. Not much to say here other than that they have the advantage of team chemistry, so they'll probably do okay in Brazil. Their roster just doesn't make me think that they're going to be a top team in EU. EG are probably the least exciting team in NA right now. When you've got teams like C9 and Sentinels making huge moves, signing Ethan and Superman to your old core really isn't that hype. I honestly think that Jorgamo, Busio and Com are really good players, but I don't think they'll be able to rise to the level of play needed to make a mark on the Sao Paulo tournament quickly enough. Vitality were another tier 2 EMEA team, similar to K-Corp. The difference between the two is that Vitality made some really solid moves for next year. Twiston is one of the hidden gems of EU, Multi and Destrium played well for Oglu last year, and Bone Cold, who they did already have, is a Valorant Champions winner. This team seems like they'll be solid in the EMEA League, but not challenge for the top spots. Crew are down here less because of who they signed, but more because of who they lost. Arguably their best players, Kesnet and Mazzino, have both left the team. They've downgraded across the board, and therefore I don't see them making a repeat of their run at Champions for a long while. Team Heretics have a pretty strong roster from face value. The old G2 core of Mixwell, Kellogg's and Avova, along with champions winning Zeke from Ascend and Boo from OG London United. The player quality is really high on this roster, but they don't quite have the experience as a full team for me to put them higher than this coming into Sao Paulo. Zeke is also coming off a long break, so it might take him some time to adjust to competition again. I think that over time they'll become a strong team in EMEA, but just not in time for Brazil. Detonation Gaming being in B tier might surprise some people, and this placing is really only from a gut feeling. They've signed the core from Reject, along with Zinfree from Northeption and Seoldam, the original Korean Jet. Their performance in Sao Paulo depends a lot on how Seoldam looks coming back into competition. Will he be on Jet? Will he be on Chamber? Either way, I think that they could make some surprising upsets in Brazil if Seoldam can come into this team and perform at his previous level. I talked on how much I like the roster moves that Global Esports made in this video, and I think they've built a team that could become a top contenders in the Pacific League. Just not yet. Bringing Ayrin over from NA is a great move, but it might take some time for him to incorporate his IGLing into this new roster. This factor, along with the language change to English for the Korean players, may have an effect on how they're able to play in Brazil, so we'll see. Talent Esports announced their roster with a great video and equally great players. The Xeppaa core are reuniting with Patifan, marking his return to Valorant from a brief stint in Overwatch. It's easy to forget how consistent Xeppaa have been without Patty this year, so seeing what heights they can reach with him back on the team will be interesting. Giants are similar to Team Heretics in my mind, with some G2 players and an overall solid roster. Giants are higher on this list because not only do I think they have the two best G2 players in Nuki and Hoodie, but also because they've got clear IGL in Ryan, which should give them some more structure heading into next year. As the EMEA League progresses, I think they'll end up in the middle of the pack, below the super teams but above the teams I've already mentioned. T1 and Gen G were the two hardest teams to rank in this list, specifically against each other. One has high player quality, but a confusing team role structure, and the other has the opposite. In the end, I went for Gen G above T1 for Sao Paulo. I think the Meteor star power, along with how freaking underrated King is, will be able to carry them through to a few good wins in Brazil. This might change if T1 sort out the roles properly before February though. Their player quality is insane, especially Sire player and Zeta. Furia have mostly kept their roster the same, only adding MW0. This is a great change, as MW0 is honestly a crack player and will fit right in on this team. It's easy to underestimate Furia, but they've been to 2 international events now and put up decent performances against DRX and fnatic at Champions, and with the home crowd advantage, who knows what they could do. Rounding off the B tier is Leviathan, which might surprise some, and don't get me wrong, I think their core is amazing, and their additions of NZR and Mazzino are great too. There's only one problem. They simply decided to not sign a Smokes player, for some reason. I'm sure they'll figure it out, but until then, they're at the top of my B tier. Zeta have been a fan favourite ever since their miracle run in Reykjavik, and I think that tournament shows their roster has the potential to compete at the highest level. As they rack up more and more LAN experience, they'll only get better, an exciting concept for Japanese fans. I'd love to see them go far in Brazil, so they just sneak into my A tier. Koi are the highest ranked team on this list without a significant presence in Valorant previously. They've completely revamped their roster, bringing in the coach IGL duo of Barbar and Coldamenta from Guild, along with Trex, Shados from Mech, Starkso from Ascend, and Wolfren from Kase. All extremely solid players with huge pop-off potential, and my dark horse pick for a team that could make a great run in Brazil. Here's where we get into the really good teams, the teams making big moves for franchising, and those with a real shot at the top spots in Sao Paulo. Speaking of big moves, next up is NRG. With one of the craziest rosters in Valorant history, along with another team we'll talk about soon, they've got the optic core with Ardis instead of Ye and Som instead of Marved. This is a roster that looks great on paper, but Optic ran a very specific system, and a very different system to FPX. Will Ardis be able to fit in as well as Ye did? Can Som fill Marved's big shoes? And can Victor perform to his highest level when he can't just throw his life away for the chamber player? Well, he might still be able to do that, but I think it might take a while for this team to fall into place and play at their peak. As a result, they're slightly lower than some might expect on my tier list for Sao Paulo, but I'm sure they'll rise up the NA ranks as the league continues. Liquid have made some much needed structural changes to their roster for next year. Scream, Nivera and Dimisic make way for Safe, Redgar and Nats. Finally Liquid have an IGL, not to mention also the former best player in the world. This is a powerhouse roster. I don't know if the coordination will be there just yet, but I can see the player caliber of this roster alone getting them results in Sao Paulo. After a disappointing Champions exit, 100 Thieves knew that their roster didn't need too much tweaking for next year to compete with the best. They've upgraded from Will to Cryo in the opping department, which is a great change, and this young roster will only get better with time. Losing Sean as the head coach does sting a bit, but I trust Mike's to carry on the talent development and push the team to do well in Brazil. Next is the one we've all been waiting for, Sentinels. Their roster is a wild idea, but with insane players across the board. I've put them quite high in the tier list because of that, and also because I think tenz is coming in with something to prove. He's reassured Psycho that he's ready to work hard to win, and I believe that can start in Sao Paulo. If Sentinel's system looks good in Brazil, they could honestly do really well, and I think Psycho and Kaplan can create a functioning system by then. I've got my ticket for the Sen hype train. Paper Rex are a staple in international Valorant at this point, and with no changes to their roster, I don't think that'll change much. They had an unfortunate case of the second place curse at Champs, and I think their style is starting to be figured out, but it should be enough to carry them to a decent result in Brazil. At the top of my A tier is Loud. Keeping the core of Sadak, Les and Aspas was a great move, and they've picked up 2 really exciting new players, Kawanzine and Tuis. They're both young, but that only means they have room to grow, just like the old Loud team did, and look where they ended up. With home support, a top finish wouldn't surprise me, and it would be great to see the defending world champions try to cling to their title. There's 4 teams left to rank, and they could all be considered favourites for Sao Paulo. It wouldn't surprise me to see any of these 4 teams take home the trophy, but for me, the least likely of the 4 is Cloud9. I just made a video on why their off-season has been so good, and obviously picking up the best player in the world is going to help with that. I think they'll be incredible in Brazil, but I don't know if they quite have the champions mentality yet, the same way Optic didn't at Masters Berlin 2021. But equally, Ye could just do Ye things and win the whole tournament, so who really knows. Fnatic are difficult to rank in these tier lists, because really by now they should be number 1. On paper, they're the only real super team in the league. Adding Chronicle and Leo to a crazy strong core is almost unfair, and yet I struggle to see Fnatic actually winning in Brazil because they haven't done it before. Maybe this is their chance to prove everyone wrong. I'd love to see it. DRX also had a reputation as chokers until this Champs, where they showed their true strength to finish 3rd. With Optic and Loud broken apart, it would seem that the path is open for DRX. They're the only team in S tier with no roster changes, and that will mean no time between now and then is used up by trying to integrate new players. They can simply focus on that winning trophy. I don't think this is quite their time yet though, and I'll explain why. Na'Vi. FPX, but now with the former best opper in the world and champions winner CNED. FPX made a name for themselves with odd agent comps and random player switches, so I don't think switching one player will phase them too much heading into Brazil, and I think CNED is criminally underrated by a lot of the community because of recency bias. He's still insanely cracked. My prediction is that Angel big brains everyone, Shao clutches too many rounds, Sugetsu hits some nasty one taps, xeppaa trades every death, and CNED ops DRX into the ground to take home the Sao Paulo trophy. So there it is, my VCT Sao Paulo tier list. It will probably be completely wrong, but that's why we do these things, right? Let me know what you think down below, and let me know what you want to see next. I've been Commend, subscribe if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.